so you're from the UK, and you said
Mhm.
this long form journalism style that's really popular in the US.
Yeah.
And is that like is this like an American thing? Is this not such a like a UK thing?
Yeah, long form investigative journalism, like the New Yorker, like the Atlantic,
Hmm.
like that isn't really a thing in the UK. Magazines do exist. They're there. GQ, Esquire, like they all have UK versions. But the investigative journalism, the Pulitzer type stuff,
Hmm.
it's just not part of the literature. People read a lot. I'd say people tend to read maybe a bit more in the UK than in the US, in my experience at least. Uh, but the journalism is very different. The journalism in the UK is much more news focused. It's much more
Hmm.
what's happened. In the US, there is much more of a why is this happening? What's the story? What's the background? Put me there. Help me understand the emotions, the feelings, the sounds, the tastes, all of that. And that's
Yeah.
something that I find really rich and really enjoy.
I agree. I love reading these long reads. This is making me think
Yeah.
too of there's this kind of hot story right now that in the New Yorker. I forget the name of this woman, like Lucy something, this nurse in the UK who's in prison. Um, all this stuff, and basically UK journalists can't write about it. There's some law because it's
Mm,
like still in action or something like that. But it was this. I haven't read it, but it's this hugely popular New Yorker piece.
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's not related to this difference, but like the fact that there's whatever this law where people just can't write about this, so an American journalist had to write about it. Um, I don't know. Are you aware of this situation?
That's interesting. No, I'm not aware of that, but I do know a bunch of other places where an American writer has done the investigative side of the reporting of UK or other international stories. And that's always been interesting because you hear this different perspective, not only from the Americans' perspective, but also the way that these writers tend to go about interviewing a whole breadth of people around a
Mm,
story and trying to understand the history and the context of how things have happened. But again, it's just not something that is as common in the UK. There are certain publications in London that I will say do some of this, but they tend to be more focused on the literature side and more on the
yeah,
arts potentially, as opposed to say cultural or business or other types of events.
yeah. No, that makes
Yeah,
sense. One more question kind of about this. Another tweet from a while ago. So you moved from the UK to Toronto for
yeah.
about 18 months, then moved to Austin. And you tweeted when you moved to Austin that the culture shock was so much more intense than moving from the UK to Toronto. So I don't know. While we're on the topic of this, like the cultural differences, I'm curious. This doesn't have to like connect so much to your newsletter, but I'm curious, like what that. I want to hear more about this culture shock of like moving to
Yeah.
Austin from Toronto.
Okay, yeah. Well, so yeah, worked in London for a few years, moved to Toronto with work. London to Toronto, very similar.
Huh.
The culture, the people, the cosmopolitan nature of the city, the diversity, the feeling of a place, very similar. Canadians, British people, ultra polite, very polite,
Yeah.
will always say the right thing. Americans, especially in Texas, it is a slightly different change of pace. London and Toronto are very fast pace, a lot going on cities. Austin is a fraction of the size of each of them. And the nature of the city, it tends to be a bit more spread out. But also, the
Hmm.
people tend to have a different flavor to them, let's say. In those two other places, very polite, prim and proper. But and this is me speaking as a Brit, we tend to
Yeah.
be less warm uh, to outsiders and new people. Whereas here in the US, within days of being here, people were ultra friendly, even to this day. Ultra friendly, ultra warm, less polite. I'll say that. Less polite and proper. But, people I've met once or twice will just invite me to their house for dinner. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, this would never happen in London. Or it'd be very
Hmm.
rare for me at least. Um, I think part of that is, foreigner abroad,
Yeah.
interesting person. Oh, this guy's done some stuff, so he stands out a little bit. But I think part of it's just the culture of this place. And Austin in particular does have this welcoming energy that I
Hmm.
find quite energizing.
Yeah. Texans are friendly.